John Vervaeke and Sean Coyne have together authored a new book, Mentoring the Machines. It's a book about artificial intelligence and the path forward that further develops the arguments of how to align artificial intelligence to human flourishing, and it sets those arguments into beautiful and accessible writing.
Welcome, everyone, to another Voices with Vervaeke. I'm here again with Ben Holden. This is our third conversation, one on his channel, and this is his second one on my channel. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Our last one was really interesting and thought-provoking, and I really enjoy learning about Ben's work and what he's doing. And he's going to share with us something that he's working on right now. So welcome, Ben. It's good to have you here again.
Thank you, John. Good to see you again. Yeah, and people seem to really appreciate the last conversation.
Yes.
I don't have much time to read the comments, or actually, it's an intentional thing to avoid getting too into the comments, because you can get addicted to that stuff really easily.
Yes.
Yeah. Straight off the bat, it feels like just a big, interesting question of, how do you engage with that, because there are some really interesting people commenting, and at the same time not get addicted to those little dopamine hits. So I don't know, I'm still figuring out if you got any ideas, but I wanted to say, like, the caliber of people that seem to constellate around the communities that you're helping to curate is pretty high, and it's just great to be a part of that community of people, and contribute something creative. That's what I'm working on at the moment. Just released a short story called Tokyo Yokai. This is an urban fantasy set in Japan, which I actually had voice acted by a Japanese actor called Noriko Sakura. And we had a really good conversation last night, actually, and you can see that it's out now. And she's a really interesting character. In our last conversation, you mentioned the Kyoto school.
Yes.
Of philosophers, and how Neoplatonism has an influence on these guys.
Yes.
Well, we're speaking to a Japanese person about animism and about her experiences, and she's an actor, right? And actors, the good ones, are quite porous people. They're open to they're more porous than an ordinary individual, maybe. And because she's Japanese, she has the Japanese perspective. She has the, just kind of background animism. So to work with her, that was really cool. She's like crouched down in a little home recording studio in a wardrobe, reading these very strange lines that I read, and it was just odd and a brilliant thing to do. So yeah, that's just a small contribution. It's like a 40-minute short story, something like that, a little thing, but feels good to share something.
Excellent. That's great. I'm glad that there's been some uptake of your work, which is really good too. Maybe send me the link for that, and I can put it in the notes for this video.
Yeah, thank you. But you asked me just before we started recording, what do you want to talk about? And I wasn't really sure. And I like this not knowing, and I like your style of surrender to what comes up. And that's how you get the dialogos. So I'm totally behind that, wherever it wants to go. But one idea, right, was to do something that feels a little bit of a high wire act. And that would be for me to describe some of the ideas that I'm working with on a present longer work, and see if they stand up to critical inquiry from someone like yourself.
Sure.
Not only critical inquiry, but just that dialogue.
Yeah.
That comes up might, well, I'm sure it will deepen it. I don't know what will happen, but we could try.
Yeah, let's try.
Okay, so this is epic fantasy, secondary world fantasy. So it's steeped in what Tolkien started, and we spoke about his essay on fairy stories.
Yeah.
But I want to do something that speaks to where we are today. It's set in a city, and one of the tropes that I'm working with is this trope of naming magic. Are you familiar with this?
Just the idea of in ancient Egypt, like that names carried with them sort of a magical power to invoke an entity or give you control over it. But I don't know very much about that idea.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's where it comes from. Myth and folklore are the deep taproots of fantasy literature, and fantasy, since its outset, was working with this idea of naming magic, which it borrows from ancient myth of different cultures. And people seem to have different takes on it. But one idea is that if you can name something, then you can have power over it. Sometimes that's sort of as far as it goes. Like, you know, the seminal work by Ursula Le Guin, the Tales of Earthsea. She's working with naming magic, and many others have done it as well. But I want to inflect it and maybe draw on some of the stuff that I've learned from you, actually, and other people. And this idea of, okay, so let's imagine like a mountain or a river or a piece of metal or even a person, an animal. If you could know its name, what would knowing its true name? So it's something to do with its essence, right? And maybe that links to its Platonic form, maybe. But what seems odd to me is that whatever it is, like if it's a mountain or a river or an animal or some metal, its name would be inflected by its specificity of its local character, right? So in this story that I'm working on, you have coteries of name seekers who intensely study a specific terrain or a specific phenomenon or animal or vein of metal. You'll have them living under the ground for several years, coming to know it in like deep intensity and familiarity.
Right.
They have to know it not just intellectually, but they really have to know it like as a presence. And it's that specific vein of star iron, or it's that specific river, that specific part of that specific river that has its unique character that's different to a river, you know, on the other side of the country, which may have a different name. So just that to begin with, I'm sure that brings up some thoughts and ideas for you. And I'm wondering what those are.
Well, I mean, you're bumping into a classic philosophical ontological problem, which was the relationship between the form and the specific identity. This came to a particular head in the Middle Ages. And the problem you get is you get a kind of non-conceptuality at both ends. So when you try and get the form of something, like if I ask you what the form of a bird is, it's the complete through line that gives a structural functional organization of all of the ways a bird can be. And that borders on, you know, something that you can't put into words, that's ineffable. And then when I move out of that and I try and pick up on, yeah, but what makes this bird? And this is the Buddhist notion of suchness. That's also something that, of course, by its very definition or non-definition, can't fit into a category, because it's what makes it not a member of a category, but uniquely itself. And then you get also something, you get this tension between these two. I often talk about the moreness and the suchness of a thing. And what's really interesting also is you have things like current objective-oriented ontology, and they resist what they call undermining and overmining, trying to reduce something to all of its connections or trying to reduce something just to all of its parts. And so you get this wonderful idea of a thing as this nexus, this convergence down of all the form, and yet this expression, this pure emergence of its unique suchness. And it causes you to see even ordinary, mundane objects as quite wonderful, provoking of wonder and reflection and awe. And we realize how far we are away from truly knowing them, or in your case, truly naming them. And the interesting thing about names is they hover between those two. Common names push us towards the category, and proper names push us towards the unique individual. And so,
hang on, could you give an example of that?
Yeah, so a common name, right, is dog. Dog tells you that it's part of this particular being belongs to the category dog. But like John refers to this specific individual, and John does, and this was important work done by Kripke. Proper names have no description attached to them. They're pure pointers. They're trying to just point at that there, right? Pure demonstrative reference, John, right? Because that same name can apply to somebody else. It has a very different description, and yet, and all it does is point to that individual uniquely. So proper names really put you down to, right, the here, now, suchness, uniqueness of the thing. And the common names, so John is a man, right? So somehow there's this, right, there's this categorical membership that puts me into this whole network of things and possibilities. And then there is the proper name that picks up my unique. Naming is really, really interesting that way, because the two kinds of names push us in the different directions. Those are the things that come immediately to mind.
And to add to that, you could think of naming as something that's, as William Blake might call, Eurozenic. It's cutting away this from the mystery of pure experience into a category. Or you could take the poetic view, and poets name things, but they name them beautifully and precisely, and sometimes unusually, to break that we were talking about last time. Things become familiar quickly for some reason, for many reasons. And so the numinosity of a particular thing, it can presence itself to you if it's named in a certain way differently, and poets are very good at this.
Well, but this also brings up something else. I mean, this brings up the difference between what's being said and what's being conveyed. So I'm using words like more and moreness and suchness, but they're actually conveying something that can't actually be said. And so now we get words that don't represent, they gesture towards something that can't be brought into full speech or full conception. And so I take it that there's also that aspect that goes into naming, and we forget this. Like, just think about what it means to say that something is a dog. You're saying that somehow that being there shares an identity with beings in other places, and that relationship is not a causal relationship, and it's somehow outside of specific time and space, because it binds entities in different times and places together. And one temptation, oh well, it's just abstract, but that doesn't solve the problem of you can be nominalist and say it's just in the mind, but then the problem is, but yet I can make inferences from one dog to another dog, which is a fact. It's not just a way of talking or speaking, and science presupposes that. I mean, and science presupposes these, like when it's force equals mass times acceleration, it's saying that all of these different things can be categorized in this sort of non-temporal spatial way, because they're like, where is force equals mass times acceleration? It's everywhere and nowhere, right? And so you're caught into these really interesting things if you just stop. This is what good philosophy does. Good philosophy makes the familiar unfamiliar again, in a way, so that you're genuinely open to the possibility of really relearning it, not just learning more facts about it, but really relearning it in a profound way.
Great. So let's take it a bit further then. The reason why in the story that these name seekers are trying to find the hidden names of particular veins of iron or rivers is because with it, they're able to force out the spirit that's hiding within that piece of matter into a form, into an animal form. And once they've done that, they can then kill it, take its organs out, and then use it in some kind of dark alchemy
Oh.
for the good of the country's economy and the people. So for example, there's a particular mountain near the city of Osterfold where the story's set, and there's a coterie of magicians that have been down there for years, intensely studying a vein of iron that they believe has its origins in a particular comet, a meteor.
Mm.
So it's linked to the stars, and they found that once they gleaned what they believe is its true name, they can create like a word that speaks that. And I feel like this is more, it's like a symbol, an emblem, not because alphabetic language in the West is more abstracted than, say, kanji in Japan is. So whatever that emblem is, it needs to be something like you can feel it's like glowing with power, not just a word. It's like a heightened word,
Right.
in an image.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's the first step. There's more, but do you want to comment on that bit first?
Well, no, that just reminds me of how in science we've done a similar kind of translation. The Platonic notion of the form has often been translated into formulas, where formulas are names that try to disclose the structure of the thing and thereby explain how you can predict its functionality. So water's formula is H2O, which tells you it's made up of two hydrogen and an oxygen, which means it has this particular shape, which means you can make all kinds of predictions about how it's going to perform, what you can find inside of it, what it can and cannot do. So it seems like you're doing something analogous in the fictional magic that's being done like in science, where we try to create formulas which are names. Right? H2O is a name for water, but it's a different kind of name. It's a name that tries to disclose the structural functional organization of the thing and thereby explain why it behaves the way it behaves.
Great. Yeah, this is where the nuance comes in, because if you get a particular group of magicians that are taking that approach, which is a more abstracted approach, then the creature that they force the spirit hiding within that matter, the creature that they force it to become, will be sort of distorted. They might think it's the true form of that hidden spirit within the matter,
right?
But it may not be at all. So perhaps it depends on your depth and quality of relationship. And I think of Ian McGilchrist's like 4 ways to know something deeply, to come to truth. Of science is one, intuition, imagination, and reason. And so I can imagine within this world, you would have different conflicting ideologies and schools of magic that have different takes on it.
Right. Different ways of naming. I like the idea that it's emblematic, that it's also graphic. In the graphic aspect of it is contributing to its meaning rather than being arbitrary, like the way our alphabet is to us. That's very cool.
Yeah, right. You like this then. So the next step, once they've found that emblem, whatever it is, they will etch that or emboss it onto the striking face of something called a naming hammer. And this is this enormous metal power hammer, like about 12 foot tall.
Oh.
And you've got to imagine, like, let's say they're trying to summon the hidden spirit of star iron, right? So what they'll do is, once they believe they've gleaned its hidden name, they will have that embossed onto the underside of this naming hammer, but they'll also mine some of this iron and they'll melt it down, and it will be poured into a crucible that gathers underneath the striking face of this enormous power hammer that holds that metal's true name as they see it.
Right.
And it'll come crashing down, and as it like slams its true name into itself, that's when the hidden animal form is forced out and revealed. And that's a very dangerous moment because they don't know what it's going to do. Right. Maybe they have to contain it or kill it quickly somehow, but maybe it's difficult to kill. Still working on some of these ideas, but I mean, there's quite a lot of philosophical implications or implicit ideas about nature there, and about
Yeah.
ontology and epistemology.
Yeah. Yeah.
So does it spark anything off? Do you like it? Do you go, but what about this? How do you react?
Oh, I get a bunch of associations. I mean, first of all, I get the associations from Shinto of ringing the bells or clapping the hands to try and right create that moment of sudden salience that calls out the spirit. And of course, that those moments of sudden salience are designed to wake up the spirit, call something forth, make it sound out to us, and you're doing that. And then I'm thinking, I got the idea, of Aristotle's notion of the form being imposed on the matter and actualizing it in a particular way. So, if I put this form into the wood, it becomes a table. If I put this form into the wood, it becomes a chair or something else, right? And so the form is what actualizes the potential. And then lastly, I got the idea that we still have that idea of smashing things together in order to reveal their true nature. Of course, physics does these huge colliders in which we smash things together in hopes that we will release hitherto hidden information about the thing.
Yeah, right. Something about the forceful impact seemed to make sense there. Yeah, I've really been. Oh, go on. Sorry, shoot.
I'm just being really impressed by the creative process here, the way, like, I'm getting a sense that, great or good fantasy, the way magic is being portrayed is actually capturing a lot of these philosophical and scientific resonances and then putting them into a different reorientation so they can be recovered, to use Tolkien's term, that we like I can imagine the opposite. It's people in that universe, and they do fiction, and our science would appear to them as the magic. There's this symmetry relation between our world and a possible world that seems to be a good way of seeing whether or not you've got a good fantasy, a good fantastic world going. Did that make any sense? I'm really just spinning this off the top of my head, and in response to, I'm thinking aloud with you.
Yeah, good. No, it makes me think of what Ursula Le Guin said, which is you got to be very careful about what you do with magic in your fantasy world, because you need to know what you're saying about how the world works. And I feel like within fantasy literature, there's almost you can feel the ancient battle of ideas. You can feel the mechanistic philosophy and the fantasy writers today who use magic as a metaphor for domination and control, and those that lean more toward the numinous end, and they want to evoke awe and mystery and reverence for the world. They want to do something different, but then you can overlap them as well. And some people think magic has to have rules, and then it becomes mechanical, like engineering magic. Other people want it to be mysterious, and some people are trying to overlap it in different ways. And how you do that, how it works, and how people relate to it, how it influences aspects of ordinary life and culture. These are all things that you're saying about the world. I think the world is like this. So I am trying to take her advice and be careful about what I'm saying, which is the motivation behind making myself these ideas that are just being formed, really vulnerable to you, your mind.
But I mean, I like the way you're invoking, like, as you said, philosophies, epistemologies, ontologies. That's very good. Yeah, I'm really intrigued in the power of this kind of literature to wake people up to philosophical question, or even just philosophical wonder. And again, I don't mean philosophy in the technical sense. I mean in that sense of wanting to come into ratio religio, deep right relationship with the reality of things. Anyways, please continue.
Okay, great. So, yeah, within the kind of the mainstream society of this world, you can imagine a fantasy world going through an industrial revolution, except the industry is steeped in this kind of magic.
Right.
This sort of dark alchemy is what they create a lot of their technologies out of. For example, one technology they have are these engines that they're similar to steam engines, but they are sympathetically linked to the passage of seasonal meteor showers. So for example, I mentioned this star iron that they mine. They force these wyvern-like creatures called draconids from the interiority of this metal, and with their hearts, they calcify their hearts, and they combine them with sand and soda ash, and they create a kind of glass. These glass orbs form a part of these engines, and when particular meteor showers pass over the country, these orbs respond. They do things. They heat up. They would probably do more than heat up if they were allowed, but they've just created a utility out of that. And so what you have is, I'm trying to create an economy and a set of technologies that are linked to the ecology and the ecology of the stars and the cosmos. This idea of an ecology of the cosmos, and the cosmos as some kind of dynamic living animal, is something that I'm really, really interested in. And I know it has roots in Platonism and is very strong in William Blake. And I just feel lit up by that idea. You know, this is a slight tangent now, but just to give you a deeper sense of it, there are certain beetles, many animals actually, but there are certain beetles, dung beetles, they can navigate by starlight. They have two pairs of eyes. They have one pair of eyes which sees the ground, and they have another pair of eyes that can perceive starlight very precisely. So this was a mystery of how the hell do they get their balls of shit all the way back to their holes, which are quite far away, in a fairly straight line, because they have to like put their head down to the ground and push with their back legs, so they're doing a sort of little handstand. And it's this other pair of eyes that's perceiving the stars, the relationship between the stars, so they know which way to go. They're navigating by starlight. Anyway, that's just a little link between an animal and the stars, but you could take the essence of that and you could amplify it, and go deeper with it. And that's sort of what I want to do. So this idea of the engines that this particular nation uses are linked to the passage of meteor showers. They don't know why. Maybe it's got something to do with the origins of that iron in a particular meteor, because I don't know if you know, John, that the meteor showers that visit us, like the Leonids, the Perseids, the Geminids, they come at the same time of year, and they are linked to particular comets. They're inside the trail of certain comets. So there are these celestial visitors that come, you know, on a regular basis, that pass by, and I find that really interesting, and a way into this idea of a dynamic, living, local cosmos that's not only contained within the planet, but it's trying to expand and deepen this sense of ecological thought, and the ecological thought of the heart, to use Hillman's phrase, out into the cosmos as well. Include those celestial presences, and have a, you know what I mean? Because a lot of time with people in the ecology movement or nature lovers, often it's contained within to the forest or mountains, you know, to Gaia. But there's a lot of influence, you know, there's a lot of exchange. I think Earth system scientists would say it's fairly one way. It's more like things are coming into the planet like meteors, starlight, this sort of stuff, but the planet is not giving back out into the cosmos. You know, but I don't know about that. I'm still researching, but that's what I've heard some Earth system scientists say when they're talking about, is the planet a living system or not? That being one of the criteria. I want it to be, though. So this is where I could be deluded and caught in my own illusions, you know?
Well, a couple things come to mind. They've just made a camera based on what they've been able to figure out from trilobites from the fossils, and the similar thing, two sets of eyes, one for down and one for up, very precise. Again, so that pattern, evolution has kept finding that pattern of sort of two sets of eyes. When you're doing Tai Chi Chuan, you have two sets of eyes. You have eyes looking out, which are the visible eyes, and then you have eyes looking in, which are the and there's two eyes. There's your introspective and your interoceptive eye. Looking into your mind is introception, and looking into your body, it's introspection, and looking into your body is interoception. And so you've got the like stereoscopic vision. You're looking into your mind, introspection, looking into your body, interoception, and then you have your two eyes looking out, left and right, to give you depth. And so you're trying to get a depth this way and a depth this way, and then a depth between them. And that's the kind of awareness you're trying to build. And so this idea of opening up multiple sets of eyes, I think if you could bring that a little bit more to the surface, I don't think that's just an example. I think that's an exemplary pattern. And there might be something in the relationship between the orbs and the meteorites that are picking up on different, the coordination of different sets of eyes, right? External and internal eyes, or something like that. Because that would also, I mean, I am a strong advocate that some of the science that should go in science fiction. I know it's not science fiction, but I'm just saying some of it should be cog-sci as opposed to physics or chemistry. And I think the same thing could be the case also for fantasy. Bring in, well, when human beings are really trying to get really powerfully connected so they can pick up on the nuance and the complexity and flow with it, like in Tai Chi Chuan and other martial practices, they cultivate these interpenetrating and interaffording sets of eyes. I just think I don't think that's just an example of what you're talking about. I mean, that might be more of a more general pattern, and it might help to enrich the correspondence that you've been talking about between the orbs and the meteorites. It's just a suggestion.
Totally no. I was talking with Tom Cheetham about this, and about the idea of kind of alchemists or glass makers being able to make different lenses, and they change your perception. And that makes me think of I've done quite a bit of filmmaking and photography, as well as deeper like vision quests and things like this. And it's amazing. It's amazing how one eye helps the other.
Yes.
Both.
Yes.
And being able to have different lenses, it makes me think of what Keats said. We're lived by, was it Hillman? We're lived by powers we pretend to understand. This is a depth psychological viewpoint. And if you don't know, like Hillman says, ideas that you don't know you have, those ideas have you. That's another way of saying we're lived by powers we pretend to understand.
I think of something convergent from the Upanishads, which it's not anything that the eye can see, but the power by which the eye can see. That is divine, which is again this different way we so there's the outward aspect of sight, but there's also this inward aspect, the mysterious aspect, the non-sight that makes sight possible, and that of course was a big theme in Nishitani's work, how at the essence of everything is an otherness. The one thing fire doesn't burn is itself, right? The one thing that water can't make wet is itself, and the one thing the eye can't see is itself. And this kind of otherness within identity. You could also be playing with that with the mythology of your world. It's very fascinating how you can start to do a lot of serious play with all of this and get people. It's interesting. I'm really trying to you get them sort of the adjacent possible, so they get the taste and the texture of this way of thinking, and then it becomes more easily transposable into this world. It's like like the way a good ritual works, right? A ritual has to be different but adjacently possible so that it transfers well. I just
Yeah,
find
it
it just fascinating about that human beings do this kind of stuff.
feels quite dangerous doing this now, what we're doing, because if you're too like Murakami, you know, the writer Haruki Murakami, he said something really kind of ridiculous but very interesting to entertain. He said, if you're too intelligent, then you're going to have trouble writing novels. You shouldn't be too intelligent. And what I take that to mean is, like Da Vinci said something like, too much intellectual dries out sensuality, and you need the passion of the senses for imagination. The
Sure.
most important thing with a fantasy novel, especially numinous fantasy, is that the reader just goes at some point when they're reading, oh, that's just so fucking cool. I kind of base it, you know, and for me, you know, there are different ways to inflect that. So fucking cool, but it's awe. It's just so fucking awesome. It's they get the chills. And you say reverence is the virtue of awe, and that's what it's about. So
Yeah.
when we're doing this, I'm like, all right, stay loose, stay light. You know, you got to play with these ideas and don't get caught by them. William Blake's been helping with that in two ways. One, in staying loose, and two, I think I'm just gonna steal his Urizen, you know, his mythology. There's no point trying to reinvent the wheel there. I'm gonna riff on what he's doing.
Cool.
He's taking this thing that's kind of ruling the world at the moment, that McGilchrist talks about as the god of the high functioning bureaucrat that is in control of the world. Yeah, the left hemisphere. And there's this book called The God of the Left Hemisphere by, I think, a colleague of McGilchrist's, who is drawing parallels between cognitive science and Jill Bolt Taylor. I guess you know her.
Of course.
Of course you do. You probably know her personally.
No, I don't know her personally, but I know of her work.
Yeah, yeah. And Blake's insights and mythology and work. Urizen as the god, your reason, and
Yeah.
also Horizon.
Yeah.
The way that the world that we live in is pretty well completely dominated by Urizen.
Right.
Would you say? Would you agree or not?
I think, yeah, insofar as it's dominated by the tyranny of the propositional, yes, and trying to see the world as a formal system, and the only problems that we have to encounter are well-defined problems. Yes. What, of course, there's ways in which the world is not ruled by that, because the reality of that not being true, of course, slams us in the face periodically. Like COVID comes out of nowhere and disrupts everything, and our machinery that we thought would run forever, you know, is still not properly functioning because of the way it got slammed in an unpredictable, unexpected way. Yeah, I think our I want to say that what you said is true, but it's tragic in the sense that it's ultimately even more than that. There's a sense in our culture of a barely suppressed anxiety because in some way we know that God that you're naming, just to pick up on some of your themes, is a demiurge. If I was to be a little bit Gnostic, it's not really how things run. And then what we do in order to try and address that anxiety is we pivot and we go to the other extreme. And this is, you know, this is one of Fromm's point, and then we pursue a kind of destructiveness, and we become in love with the capacity to destroy and wreak havoc and be a troll and all kinds of things, because that's the only way. Just give me one more moment on this. Like you have this, you know, all it can be is this machine, and then it's not real. And then the opposite has to be something that's totally non-intelligible, pure chaotic, pure destruction, pure loss of form. And I see our culture actually vacillating between these two things in a powerful way. Look at our popular art now, and how fascinated it is with dark and nihilistic and destruction, and the whole hermeneutics of suspicion, and right, and right, and then you have to put that it's like the shadow side of the official vision of progress and the well-functioning bureaucracy that will make the world completely safe and predictable. So I actually see our culture constantly vacillating between these two. Sorry, that took a bit, but I wanted to make something clear.
No, it's good. I want to respond to that, but I also want to fire another idea from the story at you. And I think I will do that. Because what's going on in the story is there are a small group of people that are trying to catalyze a kind of magical renaissance. I'm drawing on Florence here in the late 1400s,
right,
where they were trying to resuscitate elements of kind of pagan animism and Neoplatonism pouring into the city at that time. That's super interesting. It's so enlivening. You know, these guys, magicians like Da Vinci, were part of Ficino's, I like to imagine it, magic school, Neoplatonic academy. And scholars are kind of debating the nuances of this, but basically something was going on there. And so if the culture at large in this world is predominantly Eurozenic, you know, dominated by the god of the left hemisphere, utilitarian and reductionist, and weaponizing and economy focused, for some good reasons as well, for some like reasons that you could get behind that are to do with pulling people out of poverty. So not black and white, but at the same time, I'm imagining a kind of a confederacy of city-states in the mountains in the north of this country, where something's brewing, like it was in Florence at that time, and they're trying to make it happen. And there's a little window, perhaps like there is now, to do something to transform the culture.
Right.
So being up against it, though, being like, a lot of the time in fantasy, especially in the past, it's been save the entire universe from the Dark Lord, God, whatever. I like the idea that that's not even on the cards at all. They've already won. The world's entirely dominated by the forces of capitalism, Eurozone, etc. And so, you know, you win, the heroes win if they just somehow manage to live a soulful life. They're not gonna completely transform the entire world and live happily ever after. But feels like we're in such a dark, unpredictable time now that we win our lives. Win, it's kind of a weird word. But to live well, I feel like I can get to, if I get to my deathbed, whenever that is, and the question will be, did you go for it? Were you a champion of soul, psyche? Did you try and do what you could to help some sort of renaissance of soul making and life-sustaining culture? You know, one that has a deeper quality of connection between people and the rest of the world. So that's what I want these characters to be. Well, at least some of them. You know, if they can contribute even a little bit to that, then they've done their jobs. So there's more to say, but any reactions on that, John?
I think I mean, I'm biased, but I mean, I think you're bringing in the meaning crisis into your story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you're using fantasy as a way uh, uh, of trying to get a message across about ensoulment, Socratic self-knowledge, uh, being more attuned to the ligaments of reality, um, um, people falling in love again with the world. I think that those are very powerful themes you're bringing in. And then I see that but I mean, it's not dramatic irony, but it's like dramatic irony in that your book is actually in the real world exemplifying what's going on within the story, within the fantasy world. You're hoping that the book has that, your story, right, or book, whatever it turns out to be, right, has that capacity to help people in our world wake up to the possibilities of ensoulment, of being, getting more properly attuned, leading lives in which they feel connected to things that they want to exist, even if they don't exist. Yeah, I think that's very, very powerful. I guess the thing is, and this is what I find is a hallmark of great writing. Um, you, how do I want to say this? Give me a sec. You can't do what we've done. You can't lay out the theory in this sort of, right, propositional, descriptive. I mean, you have to somehow get people to exemplify it and show it and demonstrate it, and without ever telling it. I mean, they may see a little bit of theory here or there, but right, I guess the trick, that's the wrong word, the key thing to do is to write this such that it's exemplified as opposed to explained. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, you have to cast a spell,
yeah, oh, I see. Yeah,
or the spell that you cast needs to be one to do with waking up
I see. So
and not entering deeper into the illusion of fantasy wonderland.
yeah. See, I like the way you do this, how you move seamlessly uh between talking in the fantasy world and then using the magical language to talk about the work that you're actually doing with the fiction. I think that's really, really interesting and powerful. So they, to use a term you might have heard me use before, they bleed into each other, right? In a really powerful way for you. Is that, am I am I saying something that's landing for you?
Yes, 100%.
So what's that? What does that? And this is, I don't want to do what Blake, I don't want to do analysis by, paralysis by analysis, or vivisection to kill the life. But so, I'm trying to be, I want to be dialogical about that, but what's that like? What is that? What I'm trying to get, what's that? What's the phenomenology of it? And how does it, um, how do you experience it? And how does it translate into yourself waking up
As a reader or a writer?
as a writer?
Hmm.
The way you're bleeding between these two worlds. You said that was 100%, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then what I want to know is, what does that I want you to give a lot more meaning to this word than it's usually given. What does that
Okay. Yeah,
what does
yeah.
that feel like? What does that feel like to have that
What-
bleed? And how does it impact your thinking and your perception?
Well, in a way, the goal is the bleed, as you
Yeah,
call it. And
yeah,
that's the feeling that you're not disappearing into a meaningless fantasy wonderland that's pure illusion, and is the opposite to waking up. It's falling asleep.
yeah,
It's more you're waking up to the intrinsic awe which includes beauty and terror of,
Yeah.
of nature and life and your own part in the story. So that's the goal. And because that's difficult to do, it makes the work very difficult. And so often it's a struggle to get to the bleed. But you have it as like a guiding star, and then you're going, okay, like you were saying before, if you're going to lay out the theory in a story, you've just killed the story.
Yeah, for sure.
Can't do that. You've just written a shit or a mediocre story. And so sometimes I work direct from dreams and images, and but sometimes I work from ideas as well. And when I'm working from ideas, I'll go, okay, how can I take this philosophical idea that I'm interested in Shinto or Neoplatonism or whatever, and kind of like dress it in different clothing, or how can that idea meet the uniqueness of my imagination in a way that it becomes something that excites me when I think about it, or when it's probably like personification is absolutely crucial, I think. Personifying ideas as characters. So ideas should be characters, and then they should be trouble. Those characters should be troubled and incorrect, and in conflict with each other. I mean, this is a common thing that writers talk about. Conflict's the heart of story, and Le Guin, for one, was not into that reductionist, simplistic idea of that's what story's about. That's the only thing story's really about, conflict. She didn't like that, but it is important. And so, Shakespeare did that a lot. He would have characters embodying certain worldviews or ideas and set against each other, quite precisely, like a composer might have an idea for one part of the music that's informed by a part that she just came up with.
I was thinking, when you said that, I was immediately thinking of Brutus and Cassius and Julius Caesar, and how if they could just properly integrate, they could avoid the tragedy that is going to befall them. That's because they're so different from each other, but they form this friendship, and then Brutus is a stoic, and then Cassius is basically just an impulsive, immoral person, and they're doing this thing, and it's a race to see if they can properly integrate before tragedy befalls them. And of course they don't, but that's what for me gives that story this powerful momentum. And so I'm just using that as an example of what you said about how Shakespeare did this great thing about ideas and worldviews and viewpoints become characters, and the relationship between them, the dramatic relationship between them, also is playing out. There's a nice play on words there. Is playing out, the relationship, the whole set of relationships between the worldviews and the positions. That's really. I'm really fascinated by all of this, because I'm really fascinated about the connections between drama and ritual. Victor Turner made that famous, right? From ritual to theater, and then how that then translates into fiction. This is what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at. Your answer is good. I'm not dismissing it, but I'm trying to get at how, like, what are you noticing different in, say you're writing, or you've written a story with really good bleed. What do you find yourself doing in your life, or thinking, or how you're interacting with other people that's different? How does it transform you? Because that would be true bleed, right? It wouldn't just be a sensation or an experience. It would be an actual transfer. Did that make sense as a question?
Yes. I have to say that at this point, I haven't done it yet.
Oh.
I'm a journeyman at best.
Oh.
So I spent a long time learning the craft, but I haven't really I've put some short stories and a book of poems and essays out there, but you know, a novel, a longer story, I haven't done yet. That's what I'm working on. In fact, I've been working on it a long time in different ways, and it's very difficult for it to match your own internal ambitions.
Yeah, yeah,
So, you know, in the past, all the millions of words that I've written and just sort of burned,
yeah,
I see that as practice. And
yeah,
now, only just now, I've got the skills and practice necessary to do something half decent. And you know, if it's decent, then if I think it's decent and it's come close to meeting my own internal standards, then that'll be an enormous relief. That'll be a transformative moment in my life, and some kind of bleed will have occurred. And when
ah.
it does, then I'll be able to tell you. But right now, yeah, I'm still cooking.
So fair answer, good answer. It's right now. It's still a proper part of your sort of Socratic aspiration. I get that. That's excellent. Well,
Yes.
go ahead.
Do I have time for one more question or
Yes,
not?
yes, you do.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask you about this, right? So I mentioned before this idea of the cosmos as like a living animal.
Sure.
This was almost a normal idea in certain cultures, even certain cultures today. But in Renaissance Florence, that circle of Neoplatonists and artists, scientists of their day, I think they had that idea, you know, and the experience of the stars and the night sky was completely vivid and alive, and imagination and matter were interpenetrated much more than they are now. They don't have to caveat everything like we do philosophically. I just wonder, John, there are certain people that would dismiss that idea and say it's hocus pocus, the idea of the cosmos as somehow sentient. What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me answer it historically. One of the things I do when I talk about this period around, this is work. This what I'm saying is based on work by Mark Taylor. Is we tend to tell the story of the scientific revolution of the Aristotelians versus the Cartesians. Here's the math. Here's the mathematical science versus the non-mathematical science. And Aristotle loses, and Descartes, and of course after Descartes, Newton, and Descartes wins. And that's sort of the official story. And you have to understand how Cartesian we now think science is. We think of science as math and graph. There's no graphing, there's no math in Aristotelian science. So Descartes wins in a very profound way. But there was actually a third contender. There were the Neoplatonic magicians, using magic in the way you're talking about it here. And what's really interesting is they had a very different view from both the Aristotelian and the Cartesians. The Aristotelians think of matter as pure potential. And then the big revolution with Descartes is no, matter is a real thing and it's pure extension, but it's inert. And motion, inertial motion is inert. And whereas in Aristotle, it's things are driven by an internal drive. And so these, right, but the Neoplatonic magicians emphasized that matter isn't inert, that it's real, it's not just it's actual, but it's self-organizing and dynamic. And there is the possibility of action at a distance. Things don't have to be touching each other in order to affect each other. And that life represents a different way in which matter can exist that isn't the same as how it exists outside. Now, both the Aristotelian Catholic Church and the Cartesians agreed in rejecting that. And so what happens is actually a significant chunk of the Catholic Church abandons Thomism and sides with Descartes in order to form an alliance against the Neoplatonic magicians. Because if self-organization is really deeply possible, then you don't need God as a creator. And if action at a distance is possible, then miracles aren't anything special. So they saw the Neoplatonic thing as way more threatening to Christianity than the Cartesian view. The Cartesian view that has given us the well-functioning bureaucrat as the model of how reality unfolds. So what's interesting is there's an important way in which I would argue that the Neoplatonic magicians are right, but way ahead of their time, because we now think of
so interesting.
Yes, of this self-organization and entanglement and action at a distance and the curvature of space and real relationships and real affordances and life having the capacity to evolve. When I say all of those things, of the three contenders, all of those things fit much cleaner in the Neoplatonic magician framework than they do in either the Thomistic, Aristotelian, or the Cartesian, Newtonian framework. And so there's a sense in which, if you'll allow me, I want to stop saying that it's Neoplatonic magic, because it was labeled as magic precisely as a way of trying to dismiss it to the realms of the irrational and the evil, right? And I know you don't use the word that way, but I tried and say, let's just call it the Neoplatonic philosophy of that time. And so first of all, that's my historical answer. What lesson do I learn from that about now? First of all, I take seriously and respect people like Bernardo Kastrup, who thinks something like absolute idealism is true, right? Or other similar things. I don't agree, but I don't think that what he's doing is crackpot or lunacy or anything like that. I think it's a position that is very thought-provoking for me, makes me reformulate some of my ideas in a key way, and a position I respect, especially as he articulates it. Now, all of that being said, and the fact that I'm deeply influenced by Whitehead, who has an organic metaphor for reality, if you'll allow me to use sort of a Whiteheadian framework as a way, and Whitehead saw himself as a Neoplatonist. All the philosophy is just footnotes to Plato, right? I think a Neoplatonic Whiteheadian view of the cosmos is one that I fundamentally agree with. I think asking that question, and here's where I want to be really careful, and I hope you'll be charitable to me. I think asking that question in terms of whether or not the universe is sentient or conscious is asking that question from our Cartesian framework, rather than genuinely moving to a place outside of that framework and beyond that framework that is more like what the Neoplatonic philosophers are saying.
Depends on your understanding of the word sentience.
Yes, it does. But in response to what you just said, I would say that the most pervasive understanding of the word sentience is precisely a Cartesian one in our world now. And the same thing with consciousness. And so I don't use those words because I think it's an uphill battle to try and get people to really fundamentally reuse those words. So this often happens, and across purposes. People will say something like, I think the universe is a consciousness. And then I'll say, oh, well, this is what we mean by consciousness. We mean this interior subjective experience, blah, blah, blah. And they'll go, oh, that's not what I mean by consciousness. And then I'll go, okay, then what you're saying goes from sounding really provocative to being completely obscure, because now you have to tell me what you mean. And then what will happen is it'll mean consciousness ends up meaning something like sort of the fact that reality is in some way profoundly self-organizing or something like that. And so I'm hesitant, maybe even resistant to using some of those terms, like saying the universe is alive or sentient or conscious. because I don't know if we can use those words in a way that is not going to set us at talking at cross purposes. So I try to come up with different terms. I talk about relevance realization and things like that that help to bridge and get us thinking in the way that I think the Neoplatonic philosophers thought, rather than using the language that I find is too entrapping.
Relevance realization, that's like a Trojan horse.
Very much, very much. And Heidegger's doing the same thing, right? Heidegger is trying to replace the language of subjectivity and objectivity with Dasein and Mitsein and being in the world and all of this.
Those sound more mystical. Relevance realization sounds more technical and therefore more palatable to the Cartesian mindset.
It is because but I mean, here's the hope. I mean, it is palatable to the Cartesian mindset, but nevertheless, the experience of relevance is, well, no pun intended, deeply relevant to people, and it does reach them at the core of their life. And then and there is something mysterious about it. It's like, why are you finding this relevant and not that? And so I think relevance deeply connects to meaning in life and religio and connectedness, which is something we've been talking about. So yeah, it's you might have thought intended as a compliment, but I'll take it as a compliment. I think relevance realization is a Trojan horse that allows us to actually cause the fall of Troy.
Great. I love it. I love it, John. I mean, this is why I'm so into like you and McGilchrist and Alfred North Whitehead, David Abram. You know, it's like taking this idea of the entire intelligence and consciousness is inside our skulls and expanding and deepening that and softening the boundaries between us and the more than human cosmos.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, my friend, I always like to give my guests the last word.
I think I just had it.
Got it then. Okay.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was a great pleasure.